in order to keep the system going, they can't let money supply decline. But they've let money supply decline, which tells me the plan is to tank the entire credit system. And that's how you will own nothing. The you'll be happy part, I don't know what they're going to put in the water or the air, but that's how you'll own nothing when credit collapses.
This is Kaiser Johnson with Liberty and Finance, and these are the Miles Franklin Weekly Specials for January 22nd through January 29th, 2024, while supplies last. First, we feature pre-1933 gold $10 and $20 Liberties at $89 over melt and $139 over melt, respectively. Next, backdated 1-ounce silver maples are at $3.75 over spot with a minimum order of 50. We also have backdated quarter-ounce gold maples at $59 over melt when you purchase 2 or more. And finally, backdated 1/10-ounce gold maples are just $32.50 over melt with your purchase of 4 or more coins. To order our specials or any of the many other options we have available, call us at 1-888-81-LIBERTY. That's 1-888-815-4237. We're available after hours and on weekends, and we look forward to speaking with you.
Welcome back to Liberty and Finance. We are always glad to have this widely popular returning guest, Bill Holter, a former Wall Street brokerage manager and very experienced student of all the markets, as well as a gold and silver broker, is here with us again this Tuesday, January 23rd, 2024. Bill, thanks for coming back on Liberty and Finance.
Thanks for having me back, Donegan.
You've been writing recently about a split, a divergence between two economies, the government economy versus the actual physical private economy that affects ordinary mortals. And it reminds me of when my son Elijah and I went to attend the Ron Paul Institute's Peace and Prosperity Conference in Washington, D.C. Actually, it was just outside Washington, D.C., but in Arlington. And that county is one of it's the only county that was not impacted in the entire United States by the major recession of 2007, 2008, 2009, 2010. And it's remarkable, just like in the movie Hunger Games, how the central city where the government resides is immune and impervious to the realities that are impacting, and basically the chips that are falling on everybody else. All the ordinary people are bearing the brunt of that, and the government is sailing along. There are some very important realities around that people need to be aware of. But when we hear the trumpets blowing about these government statistics of the strong economy, et cetera, what are they talking about, and why is that not connecting with ordinary people's real observations in their own lives?
Well, I think it boils down to the deficit. It boils down to federal spending. Anytime the government runs a deficit, that money gets spent, and of course that's tabulated into GDP. So, and I mean, you could take, if you took deficits out of even the last 20 years, there are many years that the economy would have statistically been negative when they printed positive growth. They printed positive growth. I mean, if you throw an extra $1 trillion or $2 trillion on the government side into the economy and that gets spent, that is, it's activity, whether it's making bombs or whatever it is considered activity. So you've got the government running, $1.5 trillion, $2 trillion deficit that does get into GDP, while the private economy that you and I and most normal people feel is in fact declining and collapsing. I mean, you've got many, many sectors in the private economy that are not only negative, but in depression. I mean, look, just for example, look at commercial real estate. That has turned into an outright disaster. I just read an article yesterday or the day before where a building that was sold for, I think it was $600 million back in 2014. And if I'm not mistaken, this might be BlackRock's or Blackstone's, one of their buildings. They bought it for $600 million. They stopped making a payment in 2022. And I think there's $300 million in debt left on it. And that debt is being offered for sale at $150 million. So you're talking about a $600 million building that is walked away from, and the lenders are going to eat 50% of the 300 million. So you're looking at a $600 million property now valued at $150 million. I mean, that's not decline or recession. That's outright depression.
And that phenomenon that you're describing is not unique to that piece of property. That's a good example, but we are hearing that there is basically a cliff coming at the end of first quarter here, where a whole you can maybe inform us what proportion of commercial loans are going to be scheduled to be renewed in 2024, and also the bank term lending program that basically the the backdoor bailout program for banks that the Fed had put up because of banks hurting so much from their underwater bond investments is also coming due as well.
Right. I don't know the percentage of loans that are coming due, but as they come due, you're looking at much higher interest rates. And if the business model was made 5 years ago, 7 years ago, you had much, much lower interest rates than you have now. So a refi, if they can get it done, if the credit's even available, a refi is, the business model's not going to work. I mean, look at the vacancy rates. I mean, what if you think about it, what did they expect was going to happen back in 2020, 2021, when they had the work from home stuff and these buildings went empty? I mean, you've got businesses left and right that are walking away from square footage. As far as the term lending facility is concerned, doesn't it seem to you, Dunnigan, that we're right back to where we were in the third and fourth quarter of 2019, when the Fed was having to put $100 billion every night into the repo market just to keep rates under control? And, you know, they're doing the same thing now with this term lending, and they're talking about ending it. What is that going to do to these banks? I mean, if they need it today, why won't they need it tomorrow?
Well, that's always the promise when there's a quote unquote temporary bridge or emergency measure or special facility that's set up. I mean, how many special facilities, I don't know, you have enough fingers to count them, have been trotted out since 2007, 2008. You know, there was QE1, QE2, QE3, Operation Twist, blah, 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 QE to infinity. Then there was all these special, when the interest rates spiked to 10% overnight, and they had to quickly scramble and provide all these extraordinary emergency measures, always, of course, temporary, just like Nixon's closing of the gold window was temporary in 1971. So you're right, these emergency/temporary measures just are piled like Band-Aids, one on top of the other, to where it becomes clear to anyone who's paying attention that there's basically we're in an emergency room for the economy and the financial system, and they're pulling out all the doctors and all the machines and trying to keep this patient looking alive. There was another guest we interviewed who said it's just like Weekend at Bernie's when they're trying to prop up a corpse and make him look like he's alive just to pass it off so that you can keep the game going, keep the con going. Any evidence that you want to point out to people other than what's already obvious to people in their own guts and their own observations about the reality that says that the real economy is in free fall, and the businesses are hurting, and those commercial loans that are due to be re-upped. I mean, a personal anecdote from my wife and myself before we moved down here to Florida, our home that we sold during the COVID crisis to an investor and rented it back from him for 2.5 years up in Ohio where we lived. He almost doubled our rent on us during that period of time because he said, well, I had to refinance my business loan and the interest rates went up, so I got to pass along the cost to you. So our rent almost doubled during those, at one point, it was all in one moment when the interest rates went up. So any observations from your standpoint about what people should be aware of about the real economy?
Well, first off, Dunnigan, the very first temporary program or income taxes back in 1907. Those were supposed to be temporary. And we now know that that's not the case. I would say, and I mean, this is a very, very broad perspective, but going back to 2008, the system, the financial system, the credit markets, the real economy, everything has been on life support since 2008. I mean, you went down the list: QE1, QE2, twist, blah blah blah, et cetera, et cetera. The patient has been on life support since 2008. And I guess this goes back to what we were just talking about in the last segment, was if it was not for printed money or borrowed money by the Treasury and dispersed, we would have had, I'm not even sure we would have had more than 2 or 3 years of growth since 2008. I mean, it's all been smoke and mirrors. It's all been the system being propped up on life support. And while we're talking about 2008, 2009, none of those, the things that occurred leading up to that caused the great financial crisis, not a single one of those has been addressed. None of those problems have been fixed. Nothing's been changed. The only thing that's happened is it's gotten bigger. The problem has gotten bigger and bigger and bigger, and the life support has gotten bigger and bigger and bigger.
Yeah, on that note, let me just share a screen, so this will fit right in. You can keep talking, but I'm going to share the Federal Reserve. This is off the St. Louis Fed's website. It's a chart of the money supply, M2 they call it. And so the wide gray bar kind of to the right of center there is the 2007 to 2009 recession. And you see that little bump in the money supply that they cranked out to bail out the banks. Remember, that was supposed to be 400 billion. Oops, 800 billion. Oops, okay, 1.6 trillion when or 16 trillion when you finally figure out what the final tab was, including international swaps and all this crazy stuff. But now that was a little speed bump in the road compared to now. Look over on the right side of the chart and tell us what you see there.
Well, to the far right is what we've been talking about for the last year and a half. The money supply is actually declining. And if you go back, I mean, Dunnigan, you could go back to 1913 when the Fed first started. And the only time you'll see a prolonged drop in money supply like that was during the Depression, the Great Depression of the 1930s.
And when you were talking about nothing's been solved and everything's actually worse now, and the efforts that they're having to make are having to be bigger, what I was alluding to in this chart was that the size of the bump of the increase in the money supply during the 2007-2009 global financial crisis, if you look at that minor bump in the middle of the chart versus the hockey stick vertical line that's, who knows, 10 times taller that they just pulled off in the last 3 years here, as you say, the emergency measures are having to become more and more extreme.
Well, Dunnigan, the Fed's balance sheet went from 900 billion to 9 trillion. It's up tenfold is what the Fed's balance sheet has grown. And this past year, they lost, $113 billion? And I don't know what their equity was going into 2023, but I think in 2021 or 2022, they had $65 billion of equity. So you're looking at a central bank with a negative equity position as it stands right now. And that's the same with the ECB, the Bank of Japan, the Bank of England. It's true with all these central banks because interest rates have risen and their holdings, the credit, the debt, the bonds that they hold have declined drastically because interest rates did nothing but rise for the most part of 2023. So you've got central banks that are technically insolvent, and the balance sheet of the Fed is 10 times larger than what it was, back in 2008 when the first bomb blew up.
Circling back then to your original thesis that got us into this rabbit hole of the debt, which is absolutely crucial, was that this false appearance of prosperity, or when any indicators that the officialdom have been pointing to saying the economy is strong, have been bought at the cost of overwhelming expansion of the debt. It's simply living off of credit cards. I mean, any household could do that. Any of us could take our credit cards, go out, max out our credit cards and say, look, I got this new wardrobe and I got this new cars and I'm going on a vacation and I just bought this new bottle of Dom Perignon. Everything, life is good, obviously, right? Everything's strong. Life is good because look at all this stuff I'm being able to buy. But it's all being bought off of tomorrow's dollars. And can you share with us any statistics about the efficiency of that as far as actually stimulating the real economy, or versus, every dollar added to the debt versus dollar expansion in the GDP that's accomplished because of that?
Well, I mean, obviously it does stimulate the real economy. If you buy a car, you bought a car and, Ford, General Motors, Chrysler, Toyota, whatever, that's a car that they sold and they made profit. I mean, and it's like that with anything, with homes, with vacations, whatever. So yeah, it does stimulate the economy, but the average person can only do that so long because we don't have the ability to print money. The government can do it because they can print the dollars to make the payment. The only problem is when all is said and done, that blows up the currency, it devalues the currency, and that currency ultimately goes to zero. And that's where the dollar is, and all fiat currencies are ultimately going. They're going to zero, which means a cup of coffee and anything else becomes infinity. And I think that's going to be the big surprise. And I think it's going to start this year. I think the big surprise is that real assets, and I'm not talking about real estate now, but real assets, commodity assets, they're going to catch a bid unseen ever before, because you're going to see the Western currencies begin to debase drastically. And I do think that 2024 is, it's a line in the sand, if you will. And I say that because we have an election coming up in November. And I'm at the point now where I give the odds of us actually having an election at less than 50-50, because I don't believe that the powers that are in place now are going to be able to cheat enough to win the election. And I mean, here in the U.S., if Trump wins, if it is a red wave and they do follow through on what they've talked about, a return to the rule of law, you're going to see a lot of people go to jail. And I think they understand this. So I fully expect some type of huge event, whether it be real or more than likely a false flag, to literally kick the table over and prevent having elections later this year. And obviously, if that's the case, then what happens to paper assets in that instance? They'll evaporate, and capital is going to move toward real tangible things that have value because they are, not because they're legislated.
You've talked to us in the past about these, first a man-made reset and then a Mother Nature reset. When you're talking about the commodities being real things, we've already got half the world in the name of the BRICS Plus already moving that direction. It's like the West is the last to the party. It reminds me of the mantras of sleazy operators on the equity market, on the stock markets, which says pump and dump or bash and stash. So when they're trash talking a company or a currency or a whatever, or a country, that's usually when they're loading up on trying to beat the using basically just a negative message just to beat the sentiment down around something so they can stock up on it because they know it's really got intrinsic value. We've seen that happening about precious metals, for example, is a barbarous relic and an archaic blah 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 blah, no longer relevant, etc. We've also seen this pump and dump, which is keep putting out false statistics about the strength of the economy, keep putting out false statistics about employment, keep putting out false statistics about inflation, etc., saying that the economy is strong. And meanwhile, you've got countries all around the world dumping U.S. treasuries. Can you talk about that, sort of that pump and dump that's going on right now with the U.S. dollar and the U.S. treasuries?
I think that's pretty obvious that's happening. just understand that the BRICS, Russia, China, and obviously China's having their own problems because they blew up a huge credit bubble. But they fully understand that the reason, for example, the reason gold has been trashed for years and years is to prove and point at dollar good, gold bad. And the reason that they do that is so that the U.S. Treasury continues to have the ability to borrow whatever they need to borrow to cover the deficits. And the BRICS nations know this. And I would just say, and I'm not sure if Sun Tzu actually said this or not, but the best way to win a war is without firing a shot. And I think if you go back to, what was it, Chairman Mao back in 1971, saying we now see the end of the dollar in sight when the U.S. went off the gold standard. So I think the BRICS fully understand what's going on. You know, that it's been a charade. It's been a Potemkin village. And they're basically allowing the U.S. to spend itself into the ground and bankrupt itself and literally let Mother Nature blow it over rather than having to go, head to head. And I also believe, I've said this on several interviews now, I think it's really important to go back and read Vladimir Putin's, I think he's done 6 or 7 speeches since the original invasion. Read those speeches and see if you disagree with anything that the man says, because really all he wants is free and fair settlement and does not want a NATO country on his border. And Russia was promised in 1998 that NATO would not move 1 inch toward the Russian border. And all you have to do is look at an interactive map, and you can see basically their border has been surrounded, and the U.S., NATO, flat out lied back in 1998 because the Russian border is or has been infringed upon. So I think it's important to read his speeches and understand that they absolutely know where the U.S. is. And this is, if you want to call it a reversal from the 1970s, the Soviet Union bankrupted themselves with Afghanistan. And I mean, here, the U.S. is like the Roman Empire. We're so spread out, and we've spent. I just read an article the other day. We're actually running low on ammunition, and we've spent very expensive munitions to stop, $2,000 drones.
Now you're talking about sort of this winning without firing a shot. In other words, getting your opponent, getting your enemy to decay within, collapse within, basically commit suicide without realizing it because you've been so clever in your psychological operations or other things. You mentioned Potemkin Village, perfect example of a psyop. What about ESG, DEI, all these strange open borders, things that both our officials are enforcing, as well as BlackRock, you mentioned, that seem to be causing just rapid decay. I mean, more effective self-destruction within our controlled demolition of our own country than if someone had been attacking us. At least if someone's attacking you overtly, you can rally around and resist it. But if it's happening from within and you're being told it's virtue signaling, you have to do this, or you're a bad person or whatever. What was it? The basket of deplorables if we don't go along with this self-destruction. Observations that you are making about this programmed destruction from within without shots being fired.
Well, that's the word, programmed. And I mean, back in 2007, when I first started writing, and before 2008, 2009 happened, I wrote that the policies that were being put in place were too stupid to not be a plan. It had to be planned. And I mean, that's exactly where we are. exponentially. And understand George Soros, the Chinese. They have planted people here in the United States. Look at the DAs that Soros has hired. That when I say hired, backed, got elected, or maybe didn't get elected. Maybe there was, I'm sure there was cheating in that also. But the United States was the beacon of democracy, the beacon of the rule of law ever since World War II, and even before World War II, because of the Constitution. And what they're doing now with these DAs that will not prosecute, they're breaking the rule of law. They're breaking the rule of law for the little guy to see. Now, on a grander scale, and I think this will be disastrous. I think it was 3 weeks ago, Washington came out and said that the $300 billion that was sequestered of Russian treasuries, that they floated the idea of taking that $300 billion to rebuild Ukraine. And that would be the biggest mistake ever made, because that would prove to the entire world that the U.S. cannot be trusted. There is no rule of law, and get your money out. So it's about the rule of law. It's about real versus unreal. And the average person is going to look at tranny men playing women's sports or whatever, all the DEI stuff. You saw what happened with the United Airlines CEO last week. The guy's a drag queen and came out totally whacked out of his mind. I'm not like a big advocate. I don't hardly ever write to anyone. I wrote to United Airlines because that's who I had flown on for the last probably 30 years. And I told them, I'm never going to fly on your airline ever again. Is there no oversight whatsoever from the board of directors over the CEO? I don't care what the pilot looks like, as long as the pilot is qualified. And they care what the pilot looks like. They care what the pilot believes in. They don't care what the pilot, it's what it sounds like to me. They don't care whether the pilot can fly a plane or not, as long as he's, part of the 3% wackos in the world. And I think that's what the number is. I think it's 3% of the world is trying to hijack the rest of the world. And I think the average person feels it and knows it in their gut that it's wrong.
For a long time, this has been brewing, and it's really coming to a head. My only hope, as we see more and more egregious examples of this twisted and upside down and inside out thinking and policies, that it will become so obvious that it'll be no longer deniable. It's when the little kid shouts, "The emperor has no clothes on," that the crowd finally feels that they're not the only ones who are having that feeling that you just described. Jordan Peterson, psychologist from formerly University of Toronto, speaks quite vehemently about this, that competence is what we need in business. Competence is what we need in education. Competence is what we need in government. So quit telling us about these, it has to be the people with the right pronouns, or it has to be any of that stuff. And forcing
it's a mental illness, plain and simple, a mental illness.
And we also have examples from just you mentioned airlines. Just recently, there was a near a crash, an emergency landing forced back on an airline. It just came out in the Epoch Times, and it turned out that the suppliers that these major airlines are now, by policy, saying that they're going to buy from are those that have high ESG scores. That's environmental, social, and governance. And so they're placing these sort of virtue signaling, agenda-driven metrics above competence, above quality, above expertise. When earlier in my career in engineering, we were sent to go to mandatory training on diversity, and they were talking about different learning styles and different communication styles. great. And when you're working with teams in a business or in home, in a family, whatever, you need to understand everybody has their own different personality, everybody has their own different temperament, everybody has their own learning style, their own communication style. The more you're aware of that, the more effectively you can function as a team. Great. But it also helps you determine what role individuals should play based on their strengths and their weaknesses. And I often thought about that, this was decades ago, as we would get on airplanes to take a flight. And I thought, thank God that it was those who were good in mathematics and engineering and who were sticklers for accuracy and truth and evidence-based experience who designed this airplane that I'm now, and who built this airplane and who inspected it that I'm now flying on, and not those that were the highly creative types. And it's like, now all of that is out the window. If you want to be a firefighter, you no longer have to be tall and strong and be able to carry a full pack of gear and a person on your shoulder as you exit the smoke-filled building. No, you need to be of the right protected category or whatever. So we've got a lot in military, same thing, and in business, same thing. So you've got when you talk, this is all tying back to what you talked about earlier when you talked about sort of the self-destruction.
It starts in education. I mean, it starts in kindergarten, grade school. I mean, look at the colleges. I mean, colleges are now spouting completely whacked out ideas. And I mean, if the education system is broken, and it's been purposely broken, what are you going to get? What are you going to get when somebody graduates college? You're going to get an idiot. If they're taught stupidity, they're going to graduate stupidity. And when they get out, you've got stupidity coming into the workforce. I mean, this has not been something that just was dreamed up a couple years ago or 5 years ago or whatever. This is something that's been going on for 10, 20, 50 years. I can tell you, I graduated high school in 1978. And in 1979 is when they came out with, quote, new math. And I'm going to use that year. 1979 was the year that the curriculum began to change. That was the peak, and the slide into stupidity started in 1979.
Yeah, that was definitely a cliff event. However, I will remind everyone that we interviewed Alex Newman from The New American and Liberty Sentinel. Please check back on about our educational interviews with him. He talks about the roots of our public education system, the government schools being based by whether it's Dewey, Horace Mann, etc. These people were either socialists, communists, atheists, etc., and they were absolutely determined to reprogram the minds. And again, we're talking about the formative years. The first 20 years of a child and a young adult's life is when their whole worldview and their self-concept and everything is being formed, and their innocence needs to be protected, and they need to be taught about rational reason and that sort of thing, and not about this lopsided, inverted, upside down gobbledygook that's passing for education. So yes, he advocates that parents band together, either do homeschooling or put together private schools, etc., do anything other than the government schooling, because otherwise the next generation, heaven help us, is going to be so much more confused than even the current one. When you're ready, I'd like us to turn to some viewers' questions, because we've got a whole bunch of them that have been submitted ahead of your arrival. Any more thoughts on what we were discussing about the planned demolition of our financial edifice?
Yeah, I do want to say the shame is that it happened on our watch, and we paid taxes to have these things done. Our tax dollars were used for the education system, and the pot's been on us frogs for years and years and years, and very few stood up and tried to alert people, and it wouldn't have worked anyway, because who cares what's going on as long as the stock market's doing well and you're comfortable. I mean, that's the way it works. People don't care until it affects them directly.
You're right. It's been going on for a long time. The other thing that is strange about that is in debate, they talk about the slippery slope fallacy, meaning you cannot argue that proposition A is incorrect because it might lead to B, and B is certainly incorrect. They say, no, you've got to argue against the thing itself, not what you claim it might lead to. And that's been misused to say that every incremental intentional step in the direction of crazy, in the direction of self-destruction, has, if you look back at the track record, it has built on the last, and it has built on the last, it has built on the last. And there's even been slips when it's like, ooh, did I say that out loud? Ooh, was the microphone on? Because we've had statements from people at the elite position, whether it was former President Obama, where there was others who have admitted that the goal is much farther down the line than what they're chipping away at incremental steps towards an ultimate goal. And in some writings, such as the Socialist Manifesto that came out like in 1962 about the Plow-Piven approach, where they're trying to turn society upside down and undermine the rule of law, undermine the police, divide the public into factions so that they don't support each other, don't support the rule of law, etc. All of those things have been part of the revolution that's been going on for decades and decades and decades, and it's always been deniability. Oh no, we're not trying to completely burn down Americans' constitutional republic and replace it with something that looks a lot more like socialist or communist and totalitarian. No, we're just doing these virtuous things, and if you're not with us, you're a hater. And so any last words on that before we move on to viewers' questions?
Well, I'll just say you summed it up in 3 or 4 words: in the direction of crazy. I mean, that's where the world has gone, and crazy is the word. The direction we're headed in the direction of crazy.
In fact, words are used all the time by those, misused, twisted, redefined. If you think about how many sayings have come out in the last decade to try to get us to do things that are unnatural, get us to comply with or participate or have our freedoms taken away from us, have our Constitution trampled underfoot in the name of something that sounds virtuous. Words are being twisted and misused by those who do have their true objectives to hide. One word like that is the word progressive. Progressive contains the word progress. Progress means you're moving towards something. What is that something towards which you're moving? What is the ultimate end of what is being claimed as progress? And if you look at that,
hell on earth, that's the direction we're going.
So that should help people wake up, trust their gut, refuse to participate, refuse to comply, and speak up and speak out. Even though you get punished for it in various ways, that's the cost of honesty. That's the cost of freedom. We're trying to do that here. You're part of that, Bill. Thank you. And if we have time for just a few answers for some questions, Utility Assistance asks, he says, Bill's one of my top favorites. Why does having official BRICS nation membership allow a nation to do what they couldn't do otherwise? There's a lot of noise made when a country is admitted, but can't they still de-dollarize, buy gold, trade outside the dollar, avoid SWIFT, etc.?
Yeah, but there's strength in numbers. There's 2 obvious early examples were Iraq and Libya. And what happened to those countries? They got bombed, their leaders were killed, Saddam Hussein and Muammar Gaddafi. And what was the first thing the U.S. took when they went in? They took their gold. So I would just say strength in numbers. I mean, would the United Arab Emirates 3 years ago have said, oh, well, we'll take all currencies, but we won't take dollars? They did that under the cover of the BRICS. They did that under the cover or under the left, the left and right wing of Russia and China, their military. The U.S. is not going to go in and bomb the UAE. The U.S. is, can you imagine 20 years ago or 30 years ago, Saudi Arabia saying, yeah, we're still going to take dollars, but we'll take other currencies? No way. So that's a pretty easy answer.
Also, at that Ron Paul Institute Peace and Prosperity Conference in Washington, D.C., Ron Paul himself described the federal government as the mafia with the flag. So basically, they can act like a traditional mob, thugs, just basically threatening with the force of financial or jail term or whatever, prison, hurt your family, hurt your business, hurt your future. And in the case of foreign countries that step out of line, attack them militarily, but all doing it rallying, waving the flag just so you rally popular support. They say support the troops while doing something that has nothing to do with the troops. It's putting the troops in harm's way, putting our beloved sons and daughters in harm's way to enact some policy that is extremely questionable in its intent.
It's worse than that. I mean, the U.S. government is worse than the mafia. The mafia has a code of ethics. They'll whack somebody who they believe needs to be whacked, but they won't kill the wife. They won't kill the kids. They won't kill the dog. And the mafia has to do clandestine because there are laws against that. The U.S., the government does whatever they want. I mean, look at January 6th. I mean, people were goaded into doing what they did. I mean, they fired the smoke bombs or flash bombs or whatever. There was 200 plus federal agents within the crowd inciting it. The difference between the mafia that has a law they have U.S. laws over them, and they've got to do things on the slide. The U.S. doesn't have to do it, and they can change. They can change the laws. They make laws for you and me, but not for them. We'll put it that way.
We have another question here from Paul Glusina, 1184, says, when things start to unravel more with the financial system, do you foresee there will be restrictions or government orders put on bullion dealers on how they do business with the general public?
That's if the system holds together. I think it's more likely that there will be a light switch event and the system basically will shut and come down. And I've heard Andy say this so many times that the biggest danger to the precious metals dealers is no supply. And I think that's more likely than having a slow burn and the system holding together and the federal government putting big restrictions on precious metals dealers. I mean, yeah, that certainly could happen, but I don't think the system will hold together long enough for that to happen.
Earlier, when you talked about foreigners waking up when they see the seizure, the freezing and seizing of foreign assets, such as happened with the Ukraine situation, and especially if those funds then get redeployed, stolen, in other words, and used against them, so that we're going to take your own funds away from you, we're going to use them against you as a weapon, that will wake up foreigners to dump their allegiance, any residual allegiance to the dollar, et cetera, would be lost there, because there's no rule of law and there's certainly no protection for their property rights. The same question in a different way is being asked by ordinary moms and pops across our country about, is it safe to keep their funds in the bank, because they're concerned about seizing, freezing, capital flow restrictions, etc., on bank accounts, or the stability and health of the banks themselves. Selected Silver Sire 7208 asks, are smaller community banks that have no low-yield treasuries and lend out their money to well-financed businesses and low mortgage risk somewhat safe places to keep money? I live in what people call a recession-proof area, the DMV, with all those government jobs. Okay, there's two questions there, but one is, are some banks or credit unions in your mind safer than others as a category in this environment?
I would just say, do you not trust the FDIC? And I know what you're thinking right now, but where I'm going is the FDIC put in writing in their bylaws in 2014, I think it was, that there will not be any bailouts, there will be bail-ins. So do you not trust that they will bail in your money? Yeah,
I think you're referring to the Dodd-Frank Act. You're right. And Andy was actually reading from that verbatim to us 2 weeks ago when we interviewed him. And it's absolutely chilling. In addition to bail-ins, they're talking about, even for those who are within the insurable limit, a 3 to 5 year process for the possible partial return of their funds.
What happened in Cyprus? You go to bed on Friday with 100 euros, you wake up on Monday with 30. And when that occurs, do you think the currency on Monday morning is going to have more or less value? So not only are you going to have less currency, but the currency itself will devalue. So, I mean, it's in an instance like that with a 70% bail-in, you could have conceivably 15, 20% purchasing power a day later. And don't try to differentiate between small and big and whatever. I'm sure the plan is to have only 5, no more than 10 major banks. So that means the rest of them are going to fail, be folded in, whatever. And the reason I say I'm sure that's the plan, because I'm sure the plan is a central bank digital currency. And can you really do a central bank digital currency with 10,000, 20,000 various banks? It'd be really, really difficult. Much easier with only 5 or 10 banks.
This is an interesting question from Paul Glusine, 1184. If banks and countries are broke, how are they able to buy record amounts of gold? Why are some countries buying gold and some aren't buying it at all? Okay, two questions there again. And I think there's a distinction there when they said if banks and countries are broke. You explained that the Federal Reserve can never go broke because they can just tell the Treasury to print any unlimited amounts of money. But what are we seeing? This phenomenon we've been hearing about for the last 4 years of record amounts, more precious metals being bought in the last 4 years than the previous 60 years combined by central banks all over the world. How is that jive with the idea that countries all over are broke because they're all in debt to the ultimate lenders?
I would just ask the question, because the dollar has been the reserve currency for, since 1944, and central banks. I mean, I lived in Costa Rica, and they had a dual currency, the colon and the dollar, and the biggest asset on the central bank's balance sheet were U.S. treasuries. So my question is, even if a country's broke, how do you know they're not selling treasuries, which is, quote, money good, to buy gold? That'd be an easy way to do it.
And you mentioned before the turnaround in the money supply, and also kind of, it looks like a approaching crisis of liquidity in the reverse repo and the bank term lending program. The viewer, the Virtual Cockpit 5001, asks, does the sharp downtrend in reverse repo operations signal a growing end of confidence between the institutional banks and the Treasury?
I really don't know the answer to that. So and I will never make up an answer. So I don't know the answer to that. I do believe that the decline in money supply is twofold, or could be threefold. And basically, money supply grows as debt increases. And I think we got to a debt saturation level. And I also believe that foreigners got to the point where they're looking at the dollar and saying, hey, wait a minute, this thing's a Ponzi scheme. I want out of dollars. And I think naturally that's going to move the money supply downward. I also believe that if you go back to 1913, when the Federal Reserve started, and you saw what happened in 1929, the 1930s, money supply dropped. They had that experience, and they understand that in order to keep the system going, they can't let money supply decline. But they've let money supply decline, which tells me the plan is to tank the entire credit system. And that's how you will own nothing. You'll be happy part, I don't know what they're going to put in the water or the air, but that's how you'll own nothing when credit collapses.
It's chilling to think that would be the case, but it does kind of make sense given the decline in the money supply in the face of everything that we're seeing. The need to keep this whole system afloat has been based on a exponentially increasing money supply. And when that ends, you're withdrawing life support.
It's already ended. I mean, you just showed the graph 10, 15 minutes ago. The growth in money supply has ended. It's flattened out a little bit over the last 2 or 3 months, but still we're what, 5, 6, 7% below the peak that was in place when we had as much debt as we had, 2, 3 years ago. So a 5%, 7% drop in money supply is like a stake through. It's like a stake through the heart. I mean, it's death to the credit markets.
And we're certainly hearing a cliff drop-off in new home starts, new mortgage repos, refinancing, excuse me. And in fact, even in the booming state of Florida, where we have relocated to, the county that we live in is the 5th fastest growing county in the country, and the fastest growing county in the state. However, one county away, they're seeing the highest rate of mortgage foreclosures in the state as well. So things are definitely changing, and changing in a way that's not obvious to some, but I think will be soon, the way you've painted the picture. We want to make sure that people know how to find you, Bill, because you've got your new website, billholter.com, but you've also got a new email address. Can you let people know how to reach you?
Yeah, you can go to billholter.com. There is a contact button there if you want to reach me directly. I did change my business email. It's bholter@proton.me.
And for those of you who don't know it, Proton Mail is what we use here at Liberty and Finance at protonmail.com. And that's the same service. It's fully encrypted, so you get end-to-end privacy. The servers are housed in Switzerland. So it's a good step and it's free. So for those who want to increase their privacy and don't want the powers that be reading all your emails, it's a good option. I'm glad you've adopted that as well. So give us that again, that email address.
It's bholter@proton.me.
All right. Well, and folks, if you don't want to miss a single interview with Bill or with any of our guests, make sure you get on our free email list so that we send you out our daily links to all of our interviews. We don't share our mailing list with anyone. You just go to our website, libertyandfinance.com, put in your name, your email address, click submit. Once you get a confirming email, make sure you confirm, then you're in. You'll get one email in your inbox per day with our latest interviews and any specials. Bill, so grateful for your presence here, keeping us down to earth, and kind of our voice on the ground there in Texas. Thank you for your consistent, continued, and steady presence here on our channel, and we're grateful for your being here for our audience and joining us on Liberty and Finance.
Thank you, Dunnigan.
This is Kaiser Johnson with Liberty and Finance, and these are the Miles Franklin Weekly Specials for January 22nd through January 29th, 2024, while supplies last. First, we feature pre-1933 gold $10 and $20 Liberties at $89 over melt and $139 over melt, respectively. Next, backdated 1-ounce silver maples are at $3.75 over spot with a minimum order of 50. We also have backdated quarter-ounce gold maples at $59 over melt when you purchase 2 or more. And finally, backdated 1/10-ounce gold maples are just $32.50 over melt with your purchase of 4 or more coins. To order our specials or any of the many other options we have available, call us at 1-888-81-LIBERTY. That's 1-888-815-4237. We're available after hours and on weekends, and we look forward to speaking with you.